So hey, I released a video yesterday that was about Darlene and my plan to homeschool kids. The punchline was that we only homeschool them during the summertime. How to homeschool artistic children, kids that have displayed some kind of interest in going into the art. You saw the video, you saw that Scarlett is interested in performing arts, Henry's interested in design and contemporary painting, and Harris has expressed interest in becoming a streetwear or shoe designer. So this is a comment response video. I received an excellent comment from TheChillman456 that questioned, in that video, I made a big deal about reducing, in the summertime, reducing the amount of screen time, and TheChillman456 I guess questioned the notion of whether or not that had to do specifically, whether or not that impulse, the idea of reducing kids' screen time had, whether I was tying that to artistic development, and he raised the issue. He raised I think the pretty good issue of that, the notion that the artist should be of their time, that screens are so prevalent in contemporary culture, and that media has so changed the way that we interact both with contemporary art as well as with culture, that it's extremely important for an artist, for a designer, for a musician or a performer to be aware, to be fully engaged in the technology of its time. What he says here, and I think this is the important part, I think unplugging your kids from their screens is more of a romantic idea towards art than a practical one. I think it's important to encourage your kids to engage in contemporary culture in any way they see fit. They shouldn't be required to engage in the outdoors in effort to grow their creativity or their artistic practice. If you're doing the outdoors thing as a father/family thing, though, I have no qualms with that as long as it isn't being associated with artistic goodness or training. I'm not sure if outside time is required at Shadowbrook, but if it is required, it feels very reminiscent of old art school professors forcing their students to do Venetian-style still lives. It's nothing more than their ego being projected, and it doesn't help the next generation or themselves learn or grow within the arts. Your wife said that one of your kids would like to pursue painting, mentioning Murakami.
How different to fine art and the subculture. So what is the borderline?
Murakami and his quote-unquote super flat paintings, which have more recently been adapted by younger painters in different ways, such as post-digital, post-analog styles of painting, were inspired almost solely by the use of screens, and the current greater conversation of art today is equally dependent on screens technology as well. Lu Yang is a thriving example. She has blasted off in the art world, and her practice is all about screens, TV, anime at its core, dissecting the social undertones and east-west fusions within it. I think the canonization of Austin Lee, a painter pupil of Murakami, he had a show at Murakami's gallery, Kaikai, in 2018 or 2017, I believe, has cemented the cultural impact of screens and their importance. In Austin's bio, his first sentence talks about the significance of growing up sketching on Photoshop rather than on paper. I think forcing your kids to abandon their screens might discourage worthwhile engagements, explorations within their generation's culture, and their ability to dissect their culture into artistic form. The kids will grow up with a distrust of screens or see them as quote-unquote bad or having a bad connotation. This is from a personal experience of a father who discouraged my screen time, and it took me years to come to terms with with the fact that it is okay to sit in front of my screen for 12 hours a day if I'm coding the app that conceives the paintings that are the backbone to my practice or otherwise engaging in meaningful actions through the screen. Ultimately, you raise your kids the way you see fit and raise them the best they can be. All I'm trying to offer is an alternative perspective that hopes to postulate that any argument you have defending unplugging your kids, there's an equal and opposite counter-argument for keeping them plugged in. I only hope that your kids aren't accidentally discouraged from valid forms of expression / future forms of expression. I saw one kid working on an iPad, so I know tech isn't totally discouraged, but I would try to make doing some plein air paintings with Procreate on the iPad and perhaps communicating on how it can be transmuted into physical form, or perhaps the significance of the range of visual languages that can be captured using technology and how those can be translated into physical languages and manifestations, or abandoning plein air paintings altogether, and speaking about how 21st century humans disseminate information through so many more avenues than direct perception. So I think that there is a bit of a miscommunication in that video. I did not show in the video, I did not show much of the contemporary design work, the contemporary illustrator and design work that I've been working on both with Harris and with Henry. So I'm going to show some of that now. So the Arches paper comes, or the paper that you screen printing it on comes in 22 by 30. Uh-huh. So document setup. 22 up top there. Here's an example of Henry's illustration and graphic design work, contemporary art printmaking, where he is making separations for 3-color print. That technical knowledge obviously is something that I am teaching him, but the drawings themselves are the result of just his own interests in contemporary pop culture and his own, his influences and his aesthetic style. So we talk about composition, we talk about compositional principles, and then we also talk about technology and how to build separations, as an example. So in response to the TheChillman456's comments, this type of activity during the specific time period of homeschooling is downplayed a bit, but this is still happening. It's just that a lot of the kind of digital illustration, digital drawing, and digital construction is happening in the evenings, after dinner and everything. The emphasis during this time period, as I mentioned and as I've shown, is placed on a more holistic approach to the body and the mind. So I don't disagree with your comments in any way, shape, or form. I actually agree that the artist must be a product of their time, or must reflect their time. And we are concerned with that. It's just balance, balance. Our kids, our 3 kids are very academically inclined. They are, I think that at least to this point, they've been very sincere and very, very, very hard workers. So for a 10-month period, the way that the military industrial complex, the way that the industrial educational complex works is that our kids basically are treated as if they are brains on a stick. They sit in a sedentary attitude all day, reading and discussing topics with teachers. So during the summer, as part of the full development of the human, rather than read about a crayfish, a freshwater yabby, it's important. I think it's extremely important that our kids interact with freshwater yabbies in their environment, in the yabby's environment. They can see that it is a life form that has its own ecosystem, has its own biome, has its own concerns, and is dangerous in its own way. It has pinchers, and more importantly, that the mind, the body, and the spirit all come up at once. So, the exercise component, it's not like we're throwing the medicine ball around here. Yesterday, which I'll show here, last evening, we went for an insane mountain bike ride at 45 Winery. I was shot. I was absolutely shot. So was everybody else that went on the ride after we got done with the ride. That is a critical component of having the brain function at its highest level. So with the TheChillman456, I completely agree with the overall sentiment that they raised. That it is important that a person that an artist is of their time. I also received a video question from Brandon Gorin through my email. You can email me at earls@cranbrook.edu.
Okay, my name's Brandon Gorin, and I work at the Milburn Stone Theater.
Oh well, it doesn't matter, because I'm just gonna end up hanging out with Will and Tunny and the usual suspects.
And I help host the Raven Lounge, the longest continually running comedy showcase and open mic in Philadelphia.
Our featured artist this week.
Can we please give it up round of applause for Carson, host this amazing open mic?
I have an Instagram I quite like, Brandon Gorin, and I have a Garfield-themed Instagram, Lasagna Club, and I'm from Maryland, and I have 2 sort of question-y things. One is, I'm coming back from a gig. One is, does the work you make move towards crescendo? I'm not sure if I'm being clear with that, but is there a moment where it all kind of ties together and then you let it go and you move forward? And the other thing is, where does the YouTube videos fall in with the rest of your work? If it doesn't, why not? And if it does, how has it affected the rest of your work?
So Brandon, if I understand correctly, yeah, does my work move towards crescendo, or does any of this work coalesce into larger pieces? A little bit earlier in my career, through the 1990s and into the early 2000s, much of the work found its natural environment ultimately in a kind of performance space. So I would make the similar type of objects that I'm making maybe on a larger scale. And then at least once a month, I would be doing performances in black box theaters. Here's a clip from a typical performance here. And so many of the pieces that I would do, much of the work that I would do, I saw as discrete, I saw as self-contained. And then paradoxically, I also saw them as components of a performative environment. I was very interested, and still am very interested in performance work. And the second question that Brandon asked is about the nature of the YouTube channel. I must say that I'm still exploring the form. I don't know if you've noticed. I've always found video editing and narrative and performance a very compelling part of artistic practice. So to some degree, I see this station as a continuation of my history with performance art. I'm a bit confused as to what the audience is. Google provides you with a dashboard, an analytics dashboard. I'm exploring is this form. You may notice that there was nearly a 2-month gap between episode 82 and episode 83, and I have to say that stemmed from a bit of confusion, you know? So I'm not sure how the YouTube channel plays into the rest of the work. I think what I've decided is to try not to think about it too much, and to simply use it as another platform for work. Maybe I should do an episode at some point on my impressions of YouTube or my experience with YouTube, which I have to say has been interesting. That's the teapot in the background. I also got a great email from Peter Bjorndal. I'm going to read a portion of that email and I'm going to try to respond to it directly. He raises one of the most difficult questions to be, in my opinion, to be dealt with as an artist, designer, performer. And that is the relationship between one's work and criticism. He specifically raises the issue of what happens when you receive criticism from two different people or a group of people, and that criticism contradicts itself. He also raises the issue of artistic authority. How are you to gauge who you're supposed to take criticism from? The person who's read Infinite Jest or the individual off the street? My opinion about these issues is something that I'm extremely passionate about and I've spent a lot of time thinking about. That does not mean that I'm right, and I'm not making a rhetorical appeal to authority. I've referenced David Bohm's book on dialogue a number of times in this on this YouTube station, this YouTube channel. I don't know why I keep calling it a station. And through reading that, as well as through spending a considerable amount of time in the critique room, I've come to the realization that when one is fortunate enough to get criticism, regardless of the source, and regardless of the intent behind the critic, even if the intent behind the critic is to wound, that it's extremely important for the artist, the designer, the performer, to pay attention to that criticism if even for a moment, to hold the criticism as true and to consider the ramifications for the criticism. To my mind, that's the only way to advance the work. So in direct response to Peter, I would suggest he laid out a scenario whereby he received criticism on a screenplay or a novel that he's writing from a number of different individuals, some of which was contradictory. And I would suggest that the nature of one of the fundamental components of the work of art, be it literature or visual art, is paradox. So I would suggest that you wrestle very, very sincerely and you think very, very deeply about all of the contradictory criticism that you receive, and that you accept it, even if for a brief moment, is true, and you process over time the criticism that is, to a degree, the most injurious, that feels the most difficult. Oftentimes, is the criticism that is, to my mind, is the criticism that is most salient, that is most direct to the heart of the matter. So again, there's a paradox in that one has to follow their own thoughts and their own intuition about their work. But in order to advance, you have to objectify your work. You have to be open to criticism. So I want to thank all three of you for taking the time to send comments. Yeah. Also, one other thing is that if you're interested in sending any kind of comments or questions, or you want to poke me with a stick, please do via video. Get out your cell phone. It doesn't need to be perfect. You can send it to earls@cranbrook.edu. Can't guarantee that I will use it. I will try to use every video. I'll try to show every video that is sent to me. Again, I can't guarantee it, but I'll make a good faith effort. All right, peace.